The morning sun was barely peeking through the lace curtains when Lucy May Bennett heard her father's heavy footsteps on the wooden stairs. She knew that sound well. Slow, deliberate, with a weight that meant serious business was coming. At 22 years old, Lucy May had learned to read the signs in their small house on Maple Street, where her father served as the town's most respected preacher. She was sitting at her vanity, brushing her long brown hair, when the knock came on her bedroom door. 3 sharp raps, just like he knocked on the pulpit when he wanted the congregation's full attention. "Lucy May, I need to speak with you downstairs in my study." 5 minutes. Her stomach dropped. The study was where important family decisions were made. It was where her younger sister had been told about going away to finishing school. It was where Lucy May herself had been informed she would be teaching Sunday school to the children. Nothing good ever happened in that room. She quickly pinned her hair up and smoothed down her blue cotton dress, the one her father said made her look presentable and modest. As she walked down the narrow hallway, she noticed how the floorboards creaked under her feet, a sound she had heard thousands of times but somehow seemed louder today. The study smelled like leather books and pipe tobacco. Her father sat behind his massive oak desk, the same one his father had used when he was the preacher before him. The morning light streaming through the window created long shadows across his stern face. "Sit down, daughter." Lucy May perched on the edge of the hard wooden chair across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, just as she had been taught since childhood. "You're 22 years old now," he began, his voice carrying that familiar tone he used when explaining scripture to the congregation. "A woman of your age needs to be thinking about her future, about securing a proper place in society." She nodded, though her heart was already starting to race. She had a feeling she knew where this conversation was heading. "Thomas Whitmore has asked for my permission to court you with the intention of marriage." There it was, the word she had been dreading for weeks. Thomas Whitmore, the banker's son with his perfectly pressed suits and soft, pale hands that had never done a day of real work. She had seen him at church every Sunday, sitting in the front pew with his family, always checking his pocket watch during the sermon as if he had somewhere more important to be. "I've given him my blessing," her father continued, not seeming to notice the way Lucy May's face had gone pale. "He's a good Christian man from a respectable family. His father owns the bank, which means you would never want for anything. The Whitmores have agreed to a generous arrangement." Lucy May felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Father, The engagement will be announced next Sunday after service. Mrs. Henderson has already offered to help plan the wedding for this autumn. Thomas is eager to begin married life before the winter months. But Father, I barely know Thomas. We've never even had a real conversation." Reverend Bennett looked up from the papers on his desk, his gray eyes sharp. "What is there to know? He's a godly man with good prospects. Love grows from respect and shared values, Lucy May. All this romantic nonsense you read in those books is just that. Nonsense." Lucy May thought about the novels she kept hidden under her mattress. Stories of women who traveled to distant places and made their own choices. Stories of love that made people's hearts race and their souls feel alive. She had always wondered what that might feel like. "I don't think Thomas and I would be well suited," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. Her father's expression hardened. "Well suited? Lucy May, you are a preacher's daughter in a small town. Thomas Whitmore is the best match you could hope for. Better than you deserve, if I'm being honest." The word stung more than she expected. "I hoped I might have some say in who I marry." "Some say?" Her father leaned back in his chair, and Lucy May could see the muscle in his jaw twitching the way it did when he was trying to control his temper. "Young lady, I have spent 22 years raising you, feeding you, clothing you, and giving you a roof over your head. I have protected your reputation and ensured you were brought up as a proper Christian woman. And now you think you have some say?" Lucy May's hands were trembling in her lap, but something inside her, something she had kept buried for years, was starting to stir. "I'm grateful for everything you've done, Father. But I'm asking if I might take some time to get to know Thomas better before we announce an engagement." "Time?" Her father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "Time for what? To fill your head with more foolish ideas? To find excuses to reject a perfectly good man? I just want to be sure." "You want to be sure?" His voice was rising now, and Lucy May instinctively shrank back in her chair. "Let me tell you what I'm sure of, daughter. I'm sure that ungrateful children who reject their parents' wisdom often find themselves with nowhere to turn when the world shows them how cruel it can be. The threat was clear, even though he hadn't said it directly. Lucy May had heard her father give similar warnings to other young people in their congregation who had strayed from their family's expectations. She had seen what happened to Rebecca Morris when she refused to marry the man her parents chose. She had been quietly asked to leave town, and no one spoke of her anymore. I need an answer. Lucy May, will you accept Thomas Whitmore's proposal, or will you continue this foolish resistance? Lucy May stared at her hands, watching them shake slightly. She thought about Thomas and his cold, calculating way of looking at her, like she was a piece of property he was considering purchasing. She thought about spending the rest of her life serving tea to his business associates and smiling politely while they discussed bank, investments, and town politics. Me? I have until tomorrow to give you my answer. Her father's expression softened slightly, perhaps mistaking her request for time as a sign that she was coming to her senses. Very well. But Lucy May, I want you to think carefully about this. Think about your future, your security, your place in this community, and think about how disappointed I would be if my own daughter chose to disgrace our family name with stubborn pride. As Lucy May stood to leave the study, her legs felt unsteady beneath her. She walked slowly up the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. When she reached her room, she closed the door quietly and sat on the edge of her bed, staring out the window at the small garden behind their house. That's when she saw him. Jake McAllister was working in their vegetable garden, his shirt sleeves rolled up as he repaired the fence that had been damaged in last week's storm. He was their hired hand, a man of maybe 25 or 26 with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that always seemed to be slightly mussed by the wind. He had been working for them for about 6 months, ever since old Mr. Peters could no longer handle the physical work around their property. Lucy May had noticed Jake before, of course. It was hard not to notice him. He had a quiet, steady way about him that was different from the other men in town. While Thomas and his friends talked loudly about their accomplishments and plans, Jake worked with his hands and spoke only when he had something meaningful to say. She had caught herself watching him sometimes as he worked in the garden or repaired things around the house. There was something graceful about the way he moved, something peaceful about his presence. Once, when she had been hanging laundry on the line, he had helped her reach a high clothespin that had fallen, and their hands had briefly touched. She had felt a strange flutter in her stomach that she had never experienced with Thomas or any other man. Now, as she watched him work, Jake seemed to sense her presence. He looked up toward her window, and their eyes met for a moment. He touched the brim of his hat in a small gesture of acknowledgement, and Lucy May felt her cheeks warm as she quickly stepped back from the window. But not before she saw something in his expression. A kindness, a gentleness that made her wonder what it might be like to have a conversation with someone who saw her as more than just a preacher's daughter who needed to be managed and married off. That evening at dinner, Lucy May barely touched her food. Her younger sister, Anna, chattered about her plans for the church social next weekend while their mother discussed the latest gossip from the ladies' auxiliary meeting. Her father said grace and carved the roast beef with his usual precision, occasionally glancing at Lucy May as if trying to read her thoughts. Thomas stopped by the bank today to discuss the financial arrangements, he mentioned casually while passing the potatoes. He's quite generous in his offer. More than generous, actually. Lucy May realized with a sick feeling that her father was talking about her like she was a business transaction. The financial arrangements, the offer, as if she was property being sold rather than a person making a life choice. After dinner, she helped her mother with the dishes, trying to act normal while her mind raced with thoughts and fears. When the kitchen was clean, she excused herself and went to sit on the front porch swing, something she often did when she needed to think. The evening air was warm, and she could hear the sounds of the small town settling in for the night, dogs barking in the distance, the clip-clop of horses pulling late carriages, the soft murmur of neighbors talking on the... Lucy May woke up the next morning with a heavy heart and red, swollen eyes. She had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine what her life would look like married to Thomas Whitmore. Every time she pictured it, she felt like she was suffocating. The house was unusually quiet when she came downstairs. Her father had already left for his morning visits to the sick and elderly members of their congregation. Her mother was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast, and Anna was still asleep upstairs. "Good morning, dear," her mother said without looking up from the stove. "Your father said you have an important decision to make today." Lucy May poured herself a cup of coffee with shaking hands. "Yes, Mama. Thomas Whitmore is a fine young man. His mother and I have been friends for years, you know. She's very excited about the possibility of you joining their family." The weight of everyone's expectations felt like a stone in Lucy May's chest. It seemed like the entire town already knew about the proposal and was just waiting for her to fall in line with what everyone expected. After breakfast, Lucy May decided to take a walk to clear her head. She told her mother she was going to visit Mrs. Henderson to discuss Sunday school lessons. But really, she just needed to get out of the house where every room seemed to whisper about duty and obligation. She walked slowly through the center of town, past the general store where Mr. Patterson waved to her from behind the counter, past the church where her father would be practicing his sermon for Sunday, past the bank where Thomas was probably counting money and planning their future together. Without really meaning to, her feet carried her toward the outskirts of town, where the houses gave way to small farms and open fields. The morning air was crisp and clean, and for the first time in days, Lucy May felt like she could breathe properly. She was walking along the fence line of the Morrison farm when she heard the sound of hammering coming from behind the old barn. Curious, she followed the sound and found Jake working on what looked like a small wooden cabin. He was so focused on his work that he didn't notice her approach. "Good morning, Jake," she called softly. He looked up, startled, and nearly dropped his hammer. "Miss Lucy May? I didn't expect to see you out this way." "I needed some fresh air," she said, looking around at the half-built structure. "What are you building?" Jake set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his work pants. "Well, it's meant to be a house, eventually. Just a small one, but it's mine. Yours?" "Yes, ma'am. I've been saving up for a piece of land for years now. Mr. Morrison finally agreed to sell me this little plot. It's not much, just a few acres, but it's enough for a garden and maybe a couple of horses." Lucy May walked around the wooden frame, amazed by the careful craftsmanship. Every joint was perfectly fitted, every board smooth and straight. "You're building it yourself?" "Yes, ma'am. Learning as I go, mostly. My father was a carpenter before he died, and he taught me some basics. The rest I've been figuring out from books and trial and error." She could hear the pride in his voice, but also something else, a quiet satisfaction that was completely different from the boastful way Thomas talked about his family's wealth. "It's going to be beautiful," she said sincerely. Jake looked pleased but embarrassed. "It's nothing fancy, just 4 walls and a roof. But it'll be honest work and clean living." They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the birds singing in the nearby trees. Lucy May felt a strange sense of peace in this place, surrounded by the smell of fresh wood and the sound of Jake's steady breathing. "Miss Lucy May," Jake said suddenly, his voice hesitant. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but you seem troubled this morning. Is everything all right?" Lucy May looked at his kind, concerned face and felt tears threatening to spill over. "My father wants me to marry Thomas Whitmore," she said before she could stop herself. Jake's expression grew serious. "And how do you feel about that?" It was such a simple question, but no one else had bothered to ask it. Not her father, not her mother, not even Thomas himself. "I don't want to marry him," she whispered, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. "I know I should be grateful. He's respectable and wealthy, and my father says it's a good match. But Jake, I feel nothing when I look at him. Nothing at all. And the thought of spending my whole life pretending to be happy." She couldn't finish the sentence. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands turning his hat over and over. "Miss Lucy May, can I speak plainly?" She nodded. "I've been working around your family for months now, and I've watched you. You're smart and kind, and you have a light in your eyes when you think no one's looking. You read books about far-off places, and you get excited when you see a new flower blooming in the garden. You're not the kind of woman who should be married off to someone just because it makes financial sense." Lucy May felt her heart racing. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. Like her thoughts and feelings mattered. Like she was a person worth knowing rather than just a daughter to be managed. "But what choice do I have?" she asked, her voice breaking. "My father made it clear that if I refuse Thomas, I'll be on my own. I have no money, no skills that could support me. Where would I go? What would I do? Jake was quiet for so long that Lucy May began to worry she had said too much, shared too much of her private thoughts with a man she barely knew. But when he finally spoke, his voice was gentle and sure. "Miss Lucy May, I know I'm just a hired hand. I don't have much to offer in the way of money or social standing. But I've got this land, and I've got two strong hands willing to work. If your father makes good on his threat, if he really does cast you out for following your heart, then my door will be open to you." Lucy May stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "What do you mean?" "I mean you'd have a place to stay. No strings attached, no expectations. Just a safe place to figure out what you want to do with your life. I could sleep in the barn until you got on your feet. Or if you decided you wanted to go somewhere else, see those places you read about in your books, I'd help you get there safely." The generosity of his offer took her breath away. "But Jake, people would talk. The scandal. Let them talk," he said simply. "What matters is that you get to choose your own path instead of having it chosen for you." Lucy May felt tears streaming down her face now, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. For the first time since her father had told her about Thomas's proposal, she felt a flicker of hope. "Why would you do that for me?" she asked. Jake looked down at his boots, suddenly shy. "Because I think every person deserves the chance to be happy. And because," he paused, seeming to gather courage, "because I've come to care about what happens to you, Miss Lucy May. More than I probably should." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Lucy May felt something stir in her chest that she had never experienced before. A warmth, a connection, a sense of possibility that made her feel more alive than she had ever felt in Thomas Whitmore's presence. "I should get back," she said finally, though she didn't want to leave this peaceful place where someone had offered her the most precious gift she could imagine, the freedom to choose. "Of course," Jake said, understanding. "But Miss Lucy May, my offer stands. Today, tomorrow, next week, whenever you need it." As Lucy May walked back toward town, her mind was spinning with possibilities she had never dared to consider. For years she had accepted that her life would follow the path her father laid out for her: marriage to an appropriate man, children, church socials, and quiet resignation to a life that felt more like a prison than a blessing. But Jake's offer had opened a door she hadn't even known existed. The idea that she could choose her own future, that someone believed she was worth taking a risk for, filled her with a courage she didn't know she possessed. When she reached her house, she found her father waiting for her in the parlor. He was sitting in his favorite chair reading his Bible, but she could tell from the set of his shoulders that he was really waiting to hear her decision about Thomas. "Lucy May," he said without looking up from his reading, "have you had enough time to think about Mr. Whitmore's proposal?" Lucy May stood in the doorway thinking about Jake's kind eyes and gentle voice, about the little house he was building with his own hands, about the freedom he had offered her without asking for anything in return. "Yes, Father," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I have." He closed his Bible and looked at her expectantly. "And?" Lucy May took a deep breath, thinking about all the ways her life could change based on the words she was about to speak. She thought about the safety of accepting Thomas, the security of following the path everyone expected her to take. But then she thought about the emptiness she felt when she imagined that life, and the spark of hope she had felt when Jake told her she deserved to choose her own happiness. "I cannot marry Thomas Whitmore, Father. I'm sorry, but I cannot." The silence that followed was deafening. Her father's face went through several expressions: surprise, disappointment, and finally a cold anger that made Lucy May's knees shake. "Cannot," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Or will not." "I will not," Lucy May said, finding strength she didn't know she had. "I know you want what you think is best for me, but I cannot spend my life." The news of Lucy May's refusal spread through their small town like wildfire in dry grass. By the time she came down for breakfast the next morning, her mother's eyes were red from crying, and Anna wouldn't even look at her. "How could you do this to our family?" her mother whispered, her voice broken. "The Whitmores are one of the most respected families in town. Thomas could have given you everything." Lucy May poured herself coffee with hands that only trembled slightly. "He could have given me security, Mama, but not happiness." "Happiness?" Her father's voice boomed from the doorway, making everyone jump. "Happiness is a luxury, Lucy May. Security, respect, a good name, those are necessities, and you've thrown them all away for some foolish romantic notion." Anna finally looked up from her porridge, her young face confused and frightened. Lucy May, people are saying terrible things. Mrs. Patterson told me that you're going to end up like crazy old Miss Abernathy, living alone with her cats. The comparison stung because Lucy May knew it was exactly what people were thinking. Miss Abernathy was the town's cautionary tale. A woman who had refused marriage in her youth and now lived as a recluse, dependent on the charity of others. "That's enough," their father said sharply. "Anna, finish your breakfast and get ready for school. Your sister has made her bed and now she'll have to lie in it." The rest of the week passed in a blur of whispered conversations that stopped when Lucy May entered a room, pointed stares at church, and the gradual isolation that came with being the subject of town gossip. Mrs. Henderson, who had been planning to help with the wedding, crossed the street to avoid speaking to her. The ladies from the church auxiliary stopped including her in their planning meetings. Most painful of all was watching her younger sister struggle with the social consequences of Lucy May's choice. Anna came home from school in tears more than once, reporting that the other children were saying mean things about their family. "Why can't you just change your mind?" Anna pleaded one evening as they sat on the porch swing together. "Thomas isn't that bad, is he? And then everything could go back to normal." Lucy May put her arm around her sister's thin shoulders. "Anna, sometimes doing what's right isn't the same as doing what's easy. I can't marry someone I don't care for just to make other people comfortable." "But what about making your family comfortable?" Anna asked, and Lucy May didn't have a good answer for that. The breaking point came on Sunday morning. Lucy May had dressed carefully for church, knowing that everyone would be watching her, judging her appearance and demeanor for signs of either repentance or defiance. She wore her simplest dress and braided her hair back severely, hoping to avoid giving anyone more reason to criticize. But as the family walked into the church, Lucy May noticed something was different. People weren't just staring, they were actively turning away from them. The usual friendly greetings were replaced by cold nods or complete silence. When they reached their regular pew, the Morrison family, who usually sat next to them, had spread out to take up more space, leaving no room for the Bennets. Lucy May felt her face burn with embarrassment as they had to find seats in the back of the church. The sermon that morning was about obedience and honoring one's parents. Her father's voice rang through the church with particular force as he spoke about children who brought shame to their families through willful disobedience. Lucy May sat frozen in her seat, knowing that everyone in the congregation was thinking about her. When children refused the wisdom of their elders, her father declared from the pulpit, his eyes briefly meeting hers across the crowded church, they often find themselves cast out from the protection and love of family. This is not cruelty but natural consequence. After the service, as people filed out of the church, Lucy May overheard Mrs. Patterson talking to Mrs. Whitmore near the door. "Such a shame," Mrs. Patterson was saying, shaking her head. "Poor Thomas, being rejected by a girl who should be grateful for his attention. I heard she's got some wild ideas about romance and love. Reading too many of those novels, if you ask me." "Well," Mrs. Whitmore replied, her voice cold with disdain, "perhaps it's for the best. We wouldn't want someone so headstrong and ungrateful joining our family anyway. Thomas deserves better than a girl who doesn't know her place." Lucy May felt each word like a physical blow, but she kept her head high as she walked past them. Outside the church, she saw Thomas himself standing with a group of young men from town. When he noticed her looking, he made a show of turning his back to her, causing his friends to snicker. That afternoon, her father called her into his study once again. This time, there was no pretense of discussion or negotiation in his manner. "Lucy May, you have embarrassed this family for the last time," he said without looking up from his desk. "I've tried to be patient, thinking you would come to your senses, but clearly, you are determined to follow this destructive path." Lucy May stood silently, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their trembling. "Therefore, I am announcing today that you will be leaving our home at the end of this week. You've chosen to reject our guidance and protection, so you can learn to make your own way in the world." The finality in his voice hit her like a physical blow. Even though she had known this was coming, hearing it spoken aloud made it terrifyingly real. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, though she already knew he didn't care about the answer. "That's no longer my concern. You're a grown woman who thinks she knows better than her family. Prove it." That evening, Lucy May sat in her room trying to figure out how to pack 22 years of life into the single carpet bag her father had left on her bed. The message was clear. She could take only what she could carry. She folded her few dresses carefully, trying to choose the most practical ones. She packed her mother's old Bible, the one gift she hoped her father wouldn't begrudge her, and hidden at the bottom of the bag, she tucked away the 3 novels she had managed to keep secret. The stories that had shown her there was a world beyond the narrow confines of their small town. Anna crept into her room that night after their parents had gone to bed. Her young face was streaked with tears, and she threw her arms around Lucy May's neck like she was afraid she might disappear immediately. "I don't understand why you have to go," Anna sobbed. "Can't you just apologize? Can't you just say you changed your mind about Thomas?" Lucy May held her sister close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Anna, listen to me. Someday you're going to be old enough to make your own choices about your life. When that time comes, I want you to remember that you have the right to choose what makes you happy, not just what makes other people comfortable. But what if I make the wrong choice? What if I end up alone like you?" Lucy May pulled back to look at her sister's face. "I'm not alone, Anna. I'm scared, yes, but I'm not alone. And maybe being alone is better than being trapped." The next few days passed in a strange, dreamlike state. Lucy May helped her mother with household chores as if nothing was happening, while everyone in the family carefully avoided talking about her impending departure. The silence was almost worse than anger would have been. On Thursday evening, as Lucy May sat on the front porch for what she knew would be the last time, she heard familiar footsteps on the gravel path. Jake appeared in the circle of light from the porch lamp, his hat in his hands and his expression serious. "Miss Lucy May," he said softly, "I heard about Sunday and about your father's decision." Lucy May felt a rush of embarrassment. "The whole town's heard by now, I'm sure." "Yes, ma'am, they have. That's actually why I'm here." Jake stepped closer to the porch, his voice low so it wouldn't carry to the house. "My offer still stands. In fact, it's more important now than ever." Lucy May looked at this man who was willing to risk his own reputation to help her, and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost knocked her over. "Jake, if I come to you, people will assume. They'll say things about both of us that aren't true." "Let them say what they want," Jake replied firmly. "I know the truth and you know the truth. That's all that matters to me. But your job with my father, your reputation in town." Jake was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "Miss Lucy May, I've been thinking about this for days. I came to this town because I needed work, and your father was willing to hire me. But I never planned to stay forever. I've got enough saved now to finish my house and start working my own land. And if helping you means I have to find a new place to start over, well, maybe it's time for a new place anyway." The generosity of his offer, the willingness to sacrifice his own security for her freedom, moved Lucy May to tears. "Why, Jake, why would you risk so much for me?" He looked at her for a long moment, his expression soft in the lamplight. "Because I've never met anyone like you, Lucy May. You're brave in a way most people don't understand. You're willing to give up everything safe and familiar for the chance to live an honest life. That takes more courage than most folks have." "I don't feel brave," she whispered. "I feel terrified." "Brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Jake said gently. "Brave means you do what's right even when you're scared." They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, and Lucy May felt the same sense of peace she had experienced at his building site. Friday evening came too quickly and not quickly enough. Lucy May had spent the day in a strange state of nervous excitement, her carpet bag packed and waiting by her bedroom door. Her mother had barely spoken to her all week, though Lucy May caught her crying quietly in the kitchen more than once. Anna had begged to stay home from school to spend Lucy May's last day with her, but their father refused. "Life goes on," he said curtly. "The sooner everyone learns that, the better." As the sun began to set, Lucy May heard the sound of wagon wheels on the gravel drive. Her heart started racing as she realized Jake had come for her, just as he had promised. She picked up her carpet bag and took one last look around the room where she had spent her entire life. The walls still held her childhood drawings, now faded and curling at the edges. Her small bookshelf stood empty except for the books her father deemed appropriate, religious texts and moral stories for young ladies. She thought about the novels hidden in her bag and smiled slightly. Soon she would be able to read them openly without fear of judgment or punishment. Downstairs, she found her mother standing at the kitchen window, watching Jake secure his wagon. When she heard Lucy May's footsteps, she turned around, her eyes red but dry. "Lucy May," she said softly, "I want you to know that despite everything, I love you. I may not understand your choice, but I love you." Lucy May set down her bag and hugged her mother tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender soap and baking bread. "I love you too, Mama. I hope someday you'll understand that I had to do this." Her mother pulled back and pressed something small and hard into Lucy May's hand. Looking down, Lucy May saw her grandmother's silver locket, the one she had always admired as a child. "It was my mother's," her mother whispered. She was a lot like you, actually, strong-willed and determined. I think she would have understood your choice better than I do." Lucy May felt tears threatening as she fastened the locket around her neck. "Thank you, Mama. I'll treasure it always." Her father appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face stern and closed off. "Your ride is here," he said simply. Lucy May picked up her bag and walked toward the door, her heart breaking a little more with each step. At the threshold, she turned back one more time. "Father, I hope someday you'll forgive me for disappointing you, but I can't be sorry for choosing my own path." He didn't respond, just stood there like a statue until she walked out the door and down the front steps to where Jake waited beside his wagon. Jake took her bag without a word and helped her up onto the wagon seat. As they drove away from the only home she had ever known, Lucy May didn't look back. She was afraid that if she did, she might lose her courage and beg Jake to turn around. The ride to Jake's property took about 20 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another world. As they left the town behind and entered the open countryside, Lucy May felt some of the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. The evening air was sweet with the scent of wildflowers, and the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink that she had never noticed during her walks around town. "Are you all right, Miss Lucy May?" Jake asked gently, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "I think so," she said, and was surprised to realize it was true. "I'm scared, but I feel free, I suppose. Is that strange?" "Not strange at all," Jake replied. "Sometimes the scariest thing and the right thing are the same thing." Jake's house was smaller than Lucy May had expected, but it was solid and well built, with a wide front porch and windows that would let in plenty of light. Behind it, she could see a small barn, a chicken coop, and the beginnings of a vegetable garden. "It's not much," Jake said, seeming suddenly nervous, "but it's clean and warm." "It's perfect," Lucy May said, and meant it. There was something honest and welcoming about the little house that felt more like home than her father's imposing two-story had ever felt. Jake showed her inside, pointing out the main room with its simple furniture and stone fireplace, the small kitchen with its wood-burning stove, and finally the bedroom. "This is yours," he said, setting her bag on the quilt-covered bed. "I'll be sleeping in the barn until you decide what you want to do next." Lucy May looked around the small, cozy room and felt an unexpected sense of belonging. "Jake, I can't let you sleep in the barn. This is your house. Miss Lucy May, I offered you a safe place and I meant it. I'm not going to make you uncomfortable by staying in the house with you. People talk enough as it is." She understood his reasoning, but it still seemed unfair. "Then at least let me help with the work around here. I want to earn my keep." Jake smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him all day. "I'd welcome the help if you're sure, but only if you want to. This isn't a business arrangement." Over the next few weeks, Lucy May discovered a completely different way of living. She woke up with the sun and helped Jake tend to the animals. 3 chickens, a milk cow named Bessie, and an old horse called Charlie. She learned to collect eggs without getting pecked, to milk a cow without getting kicked, and to curry Charlie's coat until it shone. In the afternoons, while Jake worked on expanding the house or mending fences, Lucy May tended the vegetable garden. She had always enjoyed the small flower garden behind her parents' house, but there was something deeply satisfying about growing food with her own hands. Watching tomato plants flower and bean vines climb their poles gave her a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced from embroidery or other ladylike pursuits. Evenings were the best part of the day. After a simple dinner that they prepared together, Jake and Lucy May would sit on the front porch and talk. These conversations were unlike any Lucy May had ever had. Jake listened to her thoughts about the book she was reading, asked her opinion about everything from the best way to preserve vegetables for winter to whether they should plant apple trees in the spring. "You know," Lucy May said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, I never realized how much I had to say until I met someone who actually wanted to hear it. Jake looked at her thoughtfully. You always had things to say, Miss Lucy May. You just weren't around people who valued your thoughts. It was during these evening conversations that Lucy May began to see Jake as more than just her rescuer. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed at her stories. She appreciated how he could discuss philosophy and farming with equal intelligence. She found herself looking forward to his company more than she had ever looked forward to anything in her life. One particularly warm evening in late summer, Jake brought out his guitar and played softly while Lucy May mended a tear in her work dress. The music was simple but beautiful, and Lucy May found herself relaxing completely for the first time since leaving her parents' house. That's lovely, she said when he finished the song. Where did you learn to play? My mother taught me, Jake said, running his fingers gently over the strings. She used to say that music was one of the few things in life that was purely good. No matter how hard things got, there was always a song that could make them better. What happened to her? Lucy May asked softly. She died when I was 16. Fever took her and my little sister in the same week. Jake's voice was quiet but steady. My father never really recovered. He died 2 years later, and I've been on my own ever since. Lucy May felt a deep ache of sympathy for him. I'm so sorry, Jake, that must have been terrible. It was hard, he admitted, but it taught me something important. Life is short and unpredictable, and spending it doing things that don't make you happy is a waste of the gift you've been given. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of Charlie moving around in his pasture. Finally, Jake spoke again. Miss Lucy May, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret leaving? Even when things are difficult, do you ever wish you had just married Thomas and stayed with your family? Lucy May considered the question seriously. There had been moments, usually late at night when she was lying in her small bed, when she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. She missed Anna terribly, and she worried about the hardship her choice had brought to her family. Sometimes I miss my old life, she said honestly, but I don't regret leaving. I feel more like myself here in a few weeks than I did in 22 years in my father's house. What do you mean? Lucy May struggled to find the right words. It's like I was wearing clothes that didn't fit for my entire life, and I thought that was just how clothes were supposed to feel. Now I understand what it's like to be comfortable in your own skin. Jake nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. What do you want to do with this new life of yours? It was a question Lucy May had been pondering for weeks. I want to keep learning, she said slowly. I want to read more books, see new places, maybe even write stories of my own someday. And I want to do work that matters, work that helps people. Those sound like good goals, Jake said, and for what it's worth, I think you can achieve all of them. As autumn approached, Lucy May began to realize that her feelings for Jake had grown far beyond gratitude. She found herself studying his face when he thought she wasn't looking, noticing the way his hair fell across his forehead when he was concentrating on his work. She caught herself lingering near him when they worked together. Winter came early that year, bringing with it challenges that Lucy May had never faced before. The small house that had seemed so cozy in the autumn became harder to heat when the wind howled across the open fields. The work of caring for animals in freezing temperatures was exhausting, and more than once Lucy May found herself missing the comfortable warmth of her father's well-insulated house. But even during the hardest days, when her fingers were numb from milking Bessie in the pre-dawn cold, Lucy May never regretted her choice. She and Jake had fallen into a rhythm of partnership that felt as natural as breathing. They worked together, planned together, and faced each challenge as a team. By Christmas, their relationship had deepened into something that felt both exciting and peaceful. Jake had moved back into the house when the weather turned truly cold, sleeping on a cot by the fireplace while Lucy May kept the bedroom. It was a practical arrangement, but it also felt like a natural progression of their growing closeness. They spent Christmas Day alone together, sharing a simple meal and exchanging small gifts they had made by hand. Jake had carved Lucy May a beautiful wooden box for her books, and she had knitted him a warm scarf from wool she had spun herself. It was the quietest Christmas Lucy May had ever experienced, but also the most meaningful. Do you miss them? Jake asked as they sat by the fireplace that evening, watching the snow fall outside the windows. Lucy May knew he was talking about her family. Yes, she said honestly. Especially Anna. I wonder what she's doing, whether she's happy. But I don't miss the person I was when I was with them. Spring brought new hope and new challenges. Lucy May threw herself into expanding their garden, determined to grow enough vegetables to see them through the next winter. She also began raising chickens seriously, learning everything she could about breeding and care. Jake was amazed by her natural ability with the animals and her quick grasp of farming techniques. "You're a natural at this life," he told her one evening as they watched their small flock of chickens settling in for the night. "I think I was always meant for this kind of work," Lucy May replied. "I just never had the chance to discover it." But their peaceful existence was disrupted in late spring when news began filtering in from town about trouble with the weather. The winter had been unusually harsh throughout the region, and the spring rains had failed to come. By early summer, it was clear that the area was facing a serious drought. Lucy May and Jake watched with growing concern as their own well began to run low and their carefully tended crops started to wilt despite their best efforts to conserve water. But they were better off than many of their neighbors, who had larger farms and more animals to water. It was during this crisis that Lucy May first heard news from town in almost a year. Mrs. Patterson's nephew, who sometimes delivered supplies to the outlying farms, mentioned that several families were in real trouble. "The Morrison farm is about to go under," he told Jake as he unloaded bags of feed. "And the church is struggling too. Reverend Bennett's been trying to organize relief efforts, but there's only so much he can do." Lucy May felt her heart clench at the mention of her father. Despite everything that had happened between them, she couldn't bear the thought of him struggling. "How bad is it in town?" she asked. The young man shook his head grimly. "Bad enough that people are starting to leave. The Hendersons packed up last week and headed east where they've got family. And there's talk that the bank might close if things don't improve soon." That night, Lucy May couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the people she had grown up with, the families who had been part of her life since childhood. She thought about Mrs. Morrison, who had always been kind to her, and Mr. Patterson, who had let her read books in his store when she was a child. Most of all, she thought about Anna, and whether her family had enough to eat. "Jake," she said the next morning as they worked together to water their struggling garden with precious well water, "I want to help." Jake looked up from the tomato plants he was tending. "Help who?" "The people in town. Our neighbors. Everyone who's suffering because of this drought." Jake was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "What did you have in mind?" Lucy May had been thinking about it all night. "We've got the best well in the area. You chose this land partly because of the water, remember? And we've got knowledge now about conservation and making the most of what we have. We could share that." "Lucy May," Jake said gently, "you know how the people in town feel about you. They might not welcome help from someone they think brought shame to their community." "Maybe not," Lucy May agreed, "but we have to try. These are good people, Jake. They're just scared and struggling. And besides," she added with a small smile, "I learned something important about myself this year. I'm stronger than I thought I was." Jake looked at her with admiration and something that might have been pride. "All right then. What's your plan?" Over the next few days, Lucy May and Jake developed a strategy. They would start by helping their immediate neighbors, the families whose farms bordered their own property. If word spread and people were receptive, they could expand their efforts. They began by sharing water from their well with the Morrison family, whose livestock were suffering badly. Mr. Morrison was clearly embarrassed to accept help from the woman his family had shunned at church, but his desperation outweighed his pride. "Miss Lucy May," he said awkwardly as Jake helped him load water barrels into his wagon, "I want you to know, well, maybe we were too quick to judge your situation." Lucy May felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "We all do what we think is right at the time, Mr. Morrison. What matters now is helping each other through this." Word of their generosity spread quickly through the farming community. Soon other families were approaching Jake and Lucy May for advice on water conservation and drought-resistant crops. Lucy May found herself teaching techniques she had learned through necessity, showing other women how to preserve food with less water and how to keep animals healthy during difficult times. But the most meaningful moment came when a small delegation arrived at their farm one hot July morning. Lucy May looked up from feeding the chickens to see 3 women walking up their dirt path. Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. Patterson, and to her complete shock, her own mother. Lucy May's hands trembled as she set down the feed bucket and walked toward them. Her mother looked older than she remembered, with new lines around her eyes and gray streaks in her hair that hadn't been there a year ago. "Mama," Lucy May said softly. Lucy May. Her mother's voice was thick with emotion. You look well." "I am well," Lucy May replied. "How are you? How is Anna?" "We're managing," her mother said, though Lucy May could see the strain in her face. "But that's not why we're here." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her expression humble in a way Lucy May had never seen before. "Miss Lucy May, we've come to ask for your help. We've heard about what you've been doing for the farming families, and we wondered, well, we hoped you might be willing to help organize relief efforts for the whole town." Lucy May felt her breath catch. These were the same women who had crossed the street to avoid her a year ago, who had whispered about her disgrace and predicted her downfall. "We know we don't have the right to ask," Mrs. Patterson added quickly, "not after the way we treated you. But people are suffering, and you seem to understand things about managing during hard times that the rest of us never learned." Jake appeared at Lucy May's side, and she felt strengthened by his presence. "What kind of help are you looking for?" she asked. "Everything," her mother said simply. "You've learned how to live efficiently, how to make do with less. You understand farming and animal care in ways most of us townfolk never bothered to learn. We need someone who can coordinate efforts, teach people skills they don't have, help us pool our resources effectively." Lucy May looked at these women who represented her past, then at Jake, who represented her future. "I'll help," she said finally. "But I have conditions." The three women exchanged glances. "Name them," Mrs. Henderson said. "First, this has to be about helping people, not about my reputation or social standing. I'm not doing this to win back acceptance in town." "Understood," her mother said quickly. "Second, Jake is my partner in everything I do. If you want my help, you accept that he and I work together." Lucy May saw her mother's slight wince at this, but she nodded anyway. "Of course." "And third," Lucy May said, her voice growing stronger, "when this crisis is over, I don't want anyone to pretend that helping each other means everything is forgotten. I made my choice and I stand by it. I'm not looking to come back to the way things were." The relief efforts that followed were the most intense and rewarding months of Lucy May's life. She found herself traveling between town and the surrounding farms almost daily, teaching water conservation techniques, organizing food distribution, and coordinating work crews to help the most desperate families. She worked closely with her father for the first time in over a year, and while their relationship remained strained, she could see a grudging respect growing in his eyes as he watched her handle crisis after crisis with calm competence. "You've learned a lot this past year," he said to her one evening as they finished distributing supplies to families in need.